We started this initiative sometime 2-3 years ago with very simple question. Disruption, resiliency has become a buzzword, but we want to have facts. We want to understand what lies behind this buzzword with very simple question. How do you measure resiliency? We need a measure to understand where we sit, how you measure resiliency. Second, what is the value at risk of non-being resilient? And finally, where should I invest? If I want to become resilient, I cannot duplicate production plants, go for dual sourcing on every single stuff that I buy. So I need to prioritize because I still need to optimize the cost of my end-to-end supply chain. Where should I focus? And so this was a starting point, and this is what I'm going to discuss today and take you through what we've done, the stress tests, and some client example to make it tangible. So let's start with the context. I'm not going to drill down a lot on that because you guys are all aware. I think the takeaway here is very simple. Disruption is the new normal. This is here to stay. We've been through COVID, through a ship, limitation, everything. We've got the war in Ukraine. But the reality is we are going to live in a world of disruption. Disruption is really the new normal. And so companies, organizations have to be ready to face a world of disruption. So here you've got some example of those disruption driver. If I just go through a few of them. Extreme weather. If you look at the UN data, UN tells us in 2020 we had something like 400 climate disaster. In 2025 we will be at 600. So we have to be ready to run supply chain that will have to face weather extreme disruption. Same with geopolitical turmoil. We know about that. Cyber attack, which is becoming a key topic for all of our clients. Cyber attack can really disrupt your operations. Sales and tariff. We know about the tariff war between China and the US, and we need to be ready to adapt. How does your supply chain react to any change in tariffs? Health and threat, demand and surge. Gartner called that the business moment. When you have a presentation by a social influencer and suddenly your demand explodes by 10, and so your supply chain need to be ready for surge in demand. And of course, skills shortage, which is probably one of the biggest disruptions today. All people are struggling to find the right resources, and we are going to live in a world where skills will be under shortage, and you will have to face a reality where you need to be adapt to this situation where you will not find the skills. So these are all resilient stories about how do I design a resilient supply chain that can cope with those disruptions at a minimum cost. Because of course you can duplicate, you can create a contingency plan, but you need still to maintain the optimal cost for your supply chain. So this is what we have developed with MIT, and this is what I'm going to present to you in the next slide. But before I go into the detail of our stress test, I want to spend a bit of time of what do we mean by a world performer, by a best performer in resilience. And so I took this example from the automotive industry. This client is Aptiv, a former Delphi. It's a 15 billion company, something like 170 sites across the world, 120,000 people, so a big company that was facing major disruptions starting with the ships. And 3 years ago, the CEO said, I am fed up to report my earnings and having to report a supply chain disruption. So I really want to proactively manage the resiliency of my supply chain so that I can adapt, proactively react, and react faster versus competition. And this was the discussion, the comment that the CEO made during an earnings calls. And I want to stress 5 key elements of what we mean by being a master in resiliency management. First of all, resilience is a CEO topic. It's very important. As you can see, at Aptiv, it was a CEO initiative. Why is it so important to be CEO driven? Because if you want to become resilient, you have to manage your end-to-end resiliency, which means that you have to kill your internal silos. There's no alternative. Resiliency should not be managed by procurement, logistic, planning, manufacturing, or sales. No, this is an end-to-end. And the only way to go end-to-end is to be CEO driven. So first of all, CEO driven initiative. Second one, technology, data, and analytics. No surprise to you guys, today we have to leverage the power of data and analytics simply because, to manage all the data complexities that you have, you need the digitization and the analytics so that you can get visibility and take decision before competition. This is what is key. So fully leveraging digital power, and I'll come back to that about the digital twin that we're developing for our client. Third element, the team. What you'll see is that resiliency is not a Friday afternoon job. What we see are the best performers. They have set up a dedicated resiliency management team. At Aptiv, they have 10 people, 5 people working on analytics, 5 people working on business connection. So this is not, again, a Friday afternoon job. We seek companies setting up dedicated resiliency management team with a chief resilient officer. So this is here to stay. You have to set up structural change and set up a structured resiliency team. Fourth element, you have to proactively. All again, it's about visibility and taking a decision faster versus competition. If I take one example, when you talk about resiliency, you hear a lot about having dual source for certain critical component. But guess what? If all your competition is facing the same disruption, they go to the exact same second supplier that you have selected. So the name of the game is to get the visibility and to take the decision faster versus competition. And the fifth element is about competitive advantage. Being resilient is becoming a key ingredient of competitive advantage. At Aptiv, they are winning business with the Nissan, the Volvo, the Volkswagen of this world because they can demonstrate that they have a highly resilient supply chain. Being resilient is becoming a key success factor, and you have to drive your resiliency so that you win on the market. So it's also a competitive advantage element. So those are the 5 ingredients of becoming resilient, and we see that across industries, and I'm going to give you some examples in consumer goods and other industries so that you see that resilience is becoming a key topic. Let me start by the initial example. So when we started to partner with MIT, we started with Ford. And the question from the Ford organization was very simple. When we look at our supply base, we look at what we call the strategic suppliers, which are the high-spend suppliers. But in fact, this is not really reflecting the level of risk that we're facing. So we want to revisit the way we look at risk. And what we did with them is to look at their entire end-to-end supply chain and try to pinpoint where there is. So here you can see on the slide a very simple version of the supply chain. Ford has something like 6,000 suppliers, so it's much more complex. But we have developed a whole framework so that we can identify where are the high level of risk that Ford should address. So the way we look like, we use a certain number of concepts, starting with what we call time to recover. If we look at each supplier's plant, we are assessing how long it takes in case of any type of disruption to recover so that this supplier plant can serve Ford on a normal basis. So we call that TTR. And if you look at this example of raw chemical suppliers, the TTR of this plant was 2 weeks because they could produce in Singapore and not only in China. So it only took the supplier 2 weeks to recover. And then we look at performance impact. Again, it's all about putting value behind this concept of resiliency. And so at Ford, what we came up with is looking at impact on profitability. And so the way we assess is, if there is any kind of disruption at this supplier plant, what does it mean in terms of impact on Ford's profitability? So that you can put a dollar value behind this concept of resilience. If I go a little bit deeper, I'll be done with a different type of concept. So we have the TTR, time to react, and TTS, time to survive. What we call by time to survive, if I look at Ford plants, how long can they operate in case of any type of disruption? How long can they still operate before having to stop production? And so you can see this, you look at your entire supply chain and you look at the gap between TTS and TTR, time to survive and time to recovery, and then you got a formal data of what it means and what is the potential impact of any type of disruption. So this is a framework that we have applied, and we've put a tool behind it so that we can develop a sheer value of what we mean by resilience. So this is a sanitizer outcome for Ford. And you can see we've been plotting suppliers plant on this diagram. And what you can see is this red area. So here you will find what we typically call the strategic suppliers. Those suppliers with high spend, where you have a business contingency plan, you've got category manager taking care, you have regular meetings. But here you've got the real risk. Those suppliers with small spend but very high impact on Ford profitability. And this was the main outcome for Ford executives to see, okay, we've got a bunch of suppliers. They are pretty small in terms of spend, but they have a huge impact on our overall profitability. So this is what we have to take care of. Second, we've been mapping those suppliers on a world map to see, do we have any geographical specificity? And as you can see, most of the risky suppliers were based in North America. So sometimes you hear that if you want to become more resilient, you have to balance the geographical risks. Well, yes, and some of our clients, our clients are saying, I want to bring back all production near shore. Well, it's not always true. And if you look at the food and beverage industry in the US during COVID, it was a real nightmare to get to face disruption in North America. So don't take for granted that bringing back production locally is a good solution to address resiliency. So this was for Ford, and this drove some immediate discussion about and decision about where do I need to have dual sources, where do I need to duplicate manufacturing capacity, where do I need to create a business contingency plan to really minimize the impact of any type of disruption. Again, if you look at time to survive, you also find some savings opportunities. Here you can see those situations where I can survive for 1, 2, 3 days. And this is where I need to address my risk. But you also have situations where you have a lot of inventory, so you can survive something like 50 weeks. And again, for Ford, this was a call for action to say there's a case for optimizing our inventory, the way we operate with those suppliers, because we are too much buffer. Again, having this end-to-end perspective using TTS allows you to prioritize, where you have to increase inventory, where you have to create some buffer, versus those situations where you can probably optimize your supply chain. So this was for Ford. And so here I come with a resiliency stress test. What we did manually at that time with Ford, we say we need to industrialize, because becoming resilient become a structural capacity for our clients, and we need to equip them with the capacity to continuously improve their resilience and continuously monitor where they stand in terms of overall resiliency management. So we have a very simple 3-step approach to set up this capability. First of all, we start by assessing the maturity. All our clients are willing to understand where they sit versus competition, where they sit versus their peers in their specific industry. So we start by a maturity score, just to say, okay, where we are. Because resiliency is still a new topic, and you need to create awareness with your top management. So positioning your company versus competition versus your peers allow to create a sense of burning platform. How do we compare if I am a P&G of this world? How do I compare with Danone, Unilever, Kraft, so that I see, how do I score versus resilience if I'm really convinced that this is important? So we start by this, few weeks maturity assessment to give you a sense of where you sit versus competition. Then we start building the cornerstone of the resiliency management, which is the digital twin. It's all about mapping your physical material flow and have the end-to-end visibility of how your supply chain is working. And we'll see that you can go to different level of details. Some of our clients start with tier 1 suppliers. Some other clients are going straight to tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 suppliers. There's a roadmap to maturity in terms of overall supply chain visibility. And once you have your digital twin, you move to the third point, which is I want to test my supply chain against all potential disruption. And again, I will show you some examples to see what type of disruption we're using to really stress test against all potential scenarios. We, at certain clients, we have been testing up to 6,000 different supply chain scenarios to really make sure that we point the main weakness area and we select those points where we want to priority invest. So those are the 3 steps. So quickly, if I go through each of them, first one is very easy, looking at we've got an online tool to look at your overall resilience, and we have 29 questions to just position you versus your peer versus competition to, again, create a sense of urgency and see whether or not there is improving resiliency should be a priority for your company. We've got specific industry benchmark so that, again, we can position you within your peer set. There's no data collection at this early stage. It's about qualitative survey to, assess where do we stand. Do we have a problem, yes or no? Once we have created the burning platform, we move to the structural changes, and we start by creating a digital twin. This is the first initial step, which is super important because it gives unique visibility to your end-to-end supply chain. We've been doing that resiliency stress test at many clients, and all of them are surprised by the level of visibility this type of a digital twin is providing. So how do we do that? Simply, we map your entire supply chain, and we work at the SKU level, because we want to be able to assess the impact of resiliency on revenues and profitability. And for that to happen, we need to work with the end product and service that you're selling to your end customers. So we go to a certain level of granularity. I will talk about the data roadmap to reach a certain level of maturity, but we start by data available to provide a first vision. And then, this stress test is also a way to drive the data roadmap. How do I continuously improve the quality of data so that I've got more and more accurate result with my stress test? So this is the first step, creating a digital twin. We don't care about the tools that you use. You can use whatever software you want to create that digital twin, but this is the first step to create that level of visibility. Second, you will move to the third step, which is about testing, stress testing your supply chain. So again, we have some scenarios that some clients will look, okay, if we look at the last 10 years, what type of disruption did we face? So for example, spike in demand, tier 1 supplier plant shut down, one of my manufacturing facility shutting down, disruption, we all know the port today are stuck. So I need to be able to factor those type of disruption in my end-to-end supply chain visibility. Transportation capacity shortage. We all know right now there's a big shortage. A lot of truck drivers were Ukrainians. We know that the Ukrainian guys are busy, in Ukraine, and so all our clients are facing a major shortage in terms of truck drivers. So how is your end-to-end supply chain capable to face with sudden transportation capacity shortage? So this is an automatic test that we're doing so that it provides visibility on your overall supply chain score and the main areas at risk. So this is the outcome. You first come up with a resilience dashboard with what we call a resiliency score. In that case, we come up with a 64% resiliency score that you can compare versus peer. So you have a fact-based data to assess how you're doing in terms of overall resiliency and how, where are your main areas of weaknesses. You can go by suppliers, by plant, by geographical area, so that you can really have an end-to-end global view on your supply chain situation. Second, we look at high-risk scenario analysis. We really go deep to say, what are the disruptions that will most affect your overall performance, in that case, revenues or profitability? And you start by pinpointing the key areas of focus, where you need to spend time, where you need to invest, where you need to protect your revenues. And again, you have this end-to-end perspective. You're talking about revenue, so you're going beyond the typical KPIs. For example, in many organizations, we see the logistic guys being measured on inventory. We're seeing the procurement guys being measured on procurement cost. And so those conflicts of KPIs are not driving the right decision. So with the stress test, you have one unified measure, which is the impact on profitability and revenue, so that you can make the right decisions. And there's no more internal fight between manufacturing, logistic, supply chain. You have one measure, and you can prioritize what you need to make so that you protect your overall revenues. Right now, at one of my automotive clients, the main focus is on cash. So the name of the game is to reduce inventory. But if you reduce inventory, you're reducing your overall resiliency score. And so when we came into that client and say, this is the level of risk that you're taking on revenues, then we could have a fact-based discussion on why we think reducing inventory is not the right decision right now. So again, having this universal measure of resiliency, looking at impact on revenues and profitability, is a way to kill the internal silos. And at the end of the day, I'll talk about that. Resiliency management is about making sure that you go over the internal silos and make the right decision for the business. So let me take one client example. I discussed about Aptiv in the automotive industry. I want to take one example in the food and beverage industry, because to give you some very tangible example of the decision that they took and the type of insight that they got using the test. So this is a 25 billion revenue company in the food business. And of course, they were facing major supply chain disruptions. Especially in the US, in North America, where we started, the COVID has been a nightmare in terms of securing the continuity of supply. And they said, we need to act. We can no longer live in a world where we are only reactive. We want to proactively manage disruption and, again, react faster versus competition. There were some what we call business continuity plans, but mainly for key suppliers. They found out that they were facing some disruption from small suppliers that they did not anticipate. And this was again a call for action to say, yes, we need to change the way we look at resiliency, because the way we're looking at this today is not working anymore. And again, also the starting point, and I'm pretty sure this is something that you're facing every day. They were spending too much time on firefighting activities. We all know when we are in a time of a crisis, our best people are spending too much time on firefighting activities, to such a point that almost 50% of what they were doing was about calling suppliers, trying to address one specific disruption. You are no longer managing your company, you are doing firefighting, and this is not a sustainable situation. So there's also a productivity cost equation to see, I need to be equipped so that I do not waste my time doing firefighting, because this is not a sustainable way. So what we did a proof of concept in one division in North America, where we address specific topic. And I think this is an important dimension that I want to stress. You do not have to start looking at all your SKUs, all your material, all your suppliers, all what you do. You start by focusing on specific SKUs, specific products, specific suppliers, specific plants, where you're facing the biggest risk, because you want to provide the evidence that managing resilience is driving value. So we picked 150 tier 1 suppliers, 550 materials, 3 plants, 9 distribution centers, and 1,700 customers, because we wanted to provide evidence to the company that this was driving that value. And what we did, we created a digital twin, we did qualify TTS, TTR, and we did test the resilience against 6,000 scenarios. And the way we did it, we sat down with the team and say, what type of disruption have you faced in the 10 last years? Because we want to be comprehensive. We want to make sure that we stress test against all potential scenarios. And this is no more an Excel-based discussion. This is fact-based. You're using the tool so that you've got fact-based data to understand the insight and make the decision and decide what to do. And I'm glad to say you see some element on the right, what was the outcome. And this is really what we get. Our client saying this is a game changer. And I think this is simply reflecting the fact that disruption is here to stay, and you cannot operate in a disrupted world without equipping your company, your end-to-end supply chain, with the tools to get the visibility and make the right decision. We've been quantifying over $2 billion of revenues at risk because of lack of compliance. So you see the stake, and I'll come back to that. This is not, again, a Friday afternoon job. Becoming resilient is a structured enabler that you have to develop, and this is not something that you're doing on top of your day-to-day job. Becoming resilient requires specific teams, specific tools, specific capabilities, and I think this is a key message I want to convey today. So this is what we did, and let me show you some example and duration. So this is a 6 steps process. It took us about 16 weeks to run the proof of concept, again, to demonstrate the value. Resiliency is a new topic, and you need to make sure that you provide evidence and you show to the plant manager, to the procurement guy, to the logistic guy what type of values he's driving. So data collection, creating the digital twin, identify disruption scenario, run the stress tests, you get the result, and you start executing the plan, focusing on the most important actions. I forgot to mention that in the case of Aptiv, when we look at all the mitigating action that Aptiv could take to increase the resilience, the 4 most important actions were addressing 60% of the total revenue at risk. So again, the tool is helping you identify those priority actions that you need to take and not diluting your effort across the all priorities. This is a way to focus. So let me show you some example. Again, 16 weeks. It takes time. I want to focus a little bit on data because all our clients are raising the point here. I've got crappy data. I don't have the data that we need. So how do we address the challenge of data? So first of all, we use the data that are available to provide the first level of insight. And this is good enough to provide the high level visibility that allows you to make the right decision. In the case of that client, you see that we selected only tier 1 suppliers because this client didn't have the tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 data. This is now what they're starting. But the first wave, the first one was about tier 1 suppliers, but because simply they didn't have the tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 data. I want to insist on that because basically when you start engaging into this resiliency management process, you are engaging into a data improvement roadmap. When we set up this stress test, we set up what we call a data roadmap to say, what is it going to take me to get the right quality data that I need to proactively manage my resilience? So you start with what you have, and then you continuously improve so that you run this data roadmap. And together with the chief resiliency officer, I will come back on that. You want to have a chief data officer because you cannot run a stress test without really addressing the challenge of getting quality data to proactively take the decision, again, faster versus competition. So 6 weeks a proof of concept, and then the client decided to extend to the 7 BUs in the US so that it becomes the standard tool to manage resiliency for this company. So how did we start it? Again, tier 1 supplier. They didn't have tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 suppliers data. So we started with tier 1, which was good enough, 140 suppliers. Raw, pack, semi-materials, the typical stuff that you're managing as a food and beverage company. We did exclude co-manufacturing materials because, again, we didn't have the data. 3 plants, 13 distribution centers. We focus on a certain number of SKUs because this is where we have the high revenues at risk. 1,700 suppliers, and again, 3 billion revenue at risk. And you can see what type of scenarios: supplier pumps are shut down, scarcity in raw material, spike in demand. This is a highly volatile market where suddenly, demand can explode. Transportation lead time. We all know in Europe, North America, transportation is a big challenge today. It's super difficult to get the right visibility on when your material is going to be shipped. And disruption in ports. We all know ocean freight is a mess today, and you have to be ready to face this type of disruption. So those are the disruption scenarios that we test, and we tested 7,000 stress tests for one division. You really want to be systematic. You don't want to run 1 or 2 scenarios on Excel. You want to drive your resiliency assessment with industrial capabilities. This is no more an Excel pivot table type of stuff. You need to become industrialized about the way you manage suppliers. So what did we come up with? We came up with identifying the high vulnerability areas representing 1 billion revenue at risk. So if you look at supplier capacity, we look at the top 5, we identify the top 5 most vulnerable suppliers where there is no dual source, there is no business contingency plan, and there was up to 500 million revenues at risk. Material shortage, we look at top 10 most vulnerable materials. Again, up to 1 billion revenue at risk if any disruption happen. We look at demand shift, and we reviewed every single BCP, business contingency plan, to identify the holes, identify the gaps, and decide where to address. So again, this gives you an end-to-end perspective of where are your main risks and what is it that you need to address. And to be even more specific, let me come back to the example I shared with Ford, but in that case, for the food and beverage company, you can see material, the analysis of material, and you can see material C. This company was only spending $12,000 per year with these suppliers, but with a $47 million impact on revenues. There was no inventory, it was single source, and there was no BCP. So from day one looking at those data that there's something that you need to fix quickly. because you cannot live in a world where 50 million of your revenues are at risk for a $12K supplier spend. Same with Material D. You know, this company was spending $100K, 70 million impact on the revenues. No inventory, 3 sources, no BCP. So again, this whole idea is using industrial tools to quickly assess, get visibility on your risk, and making the right decision with one factor, which is revenue or profitability at risk. So if we summarize, you know, looking at the business case of becoming more resilient, of course, we've got the revenue protection. We need to increase revenues, we need to protect revenues. And this resiliency test is about making sure that you protect revenues. It's also decreasing costs. You remember about the TTS, there are certain areas where you can optimize costs because you've got too much inventory, you're spending too much with those suppliers, you can reduce and optimize your cost of goods sold. Second value dimensions is reducing the cost of operations. And I mentioned the cost of becoming a firefighting organization. It means that 50% of your guys are spending all their days working on firefighting. This is not the way you can prepare for the future. So making sure that you optimize the time of your people so that they focus on value-added activities and they're not stuck with firefighting. And finally, of course, you can improve working capital. I discussed about the inventory. So there's a full business case in becoming more resilient. I want to close by bringing an example of what it meant. This was a specific discussion we had with one client, and I think it's a good summary of what is the outcome and what are the decisions that you should take tomorrow if you want to become more resilient. So first of all, first insight, first takeaway, excelling at resiliency management is there's no alternative. You have to go for it. You know, don't trust that where disruption will fade away. Disruption is here to stay, and becoming good at resilience is becoming absolutely essential. So there's truly a new paradigm when you have to optimize your supply chain. You have to balance cost, performance, resiliency, and also sustainability. So this whole optimization equation is becoming more complex, and you need to be equipped with industrial capabilities to run that. Building a digital twin is a must. You need this end-to-end visibility to make the right decision. And again, making the decision against revenues and impact on profitability. Go beyond the typical supply chain KPIs, inventory, cost of goods sold, cost of procurement. You need this end-to-end visibility with the revenue at risk. Collecting data is certainly boring. This is the most boring activity in supply chain, but there's no alternative. If you want to digital twin to deliver value, you have to go for a data roadmap. It means that you need to decide which data are important, what's going to be the source of data, and what is my cleaning strategy so that I can have a relevant and reliable digital twin. This whole resiliency topic has a clear impact on organization. Two main impacts is you need a chief data officer. Back to my data roadmap discussion. You need someone who's accountable of getting the right data, right quality data, so that you can make the decision. And second, you need a chief resiliency officer with a dedicated team. Again, this is not a Friday afternoon job. You need a team dedicated on that, again, to have the visibility and make faster decisions. Just as a closing, and I think this probably will be a topic for discussion with Sam. I think you're back here. This is not a Friday afternoon job. This means that you need to invest. To give you an order of magnitude, those clients that I've been discussing have been invested between 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 million. There's new operating model, new process, new behaviors, balanced KPI. This is a structural change in the way you operate, and you need to be ready for this type of transformation. With that, I'm done. Again, thanks to the TAPA community and ready for engaging discussion.
Pierre-François, thank you so much on behalf of all of TAPA EMEA for that really insightful presentation. I do have a couple of questions. You mentioned their investment and touched upon it. How much would you say it would cost to implement the resilience capabilities that you've been discussing?
Yeah, I think this is a very, very good question, because sometimes when we start the discussion with our clients, they say, okay, it's going to be a fine-tuning adaptation. No, it's not. You know, back to the question, you've got to change the process, you've got to change your operation, you've got to recruit people. In the case of Aptiv, they have 5 full-time dedicated data scientists. So, you know, this is a real investment, and you have to convince your top management that this is worth investment. This is why it is so important to bring the business case here. This is a business, the value at risk. You saw in the food and beverage example, we are talking about $2 billion revenue at risk. So typically, if I look at the clients we've been working in the last months, we're talking about 5-10 million investments. This is for real. So don't think that you're going to improve resilience by just doing some adjustment. I'm sorry to say that. I'd like to say this is a free lunch. This is not, and you need to be ready for this type of investment.
You talked about the digital twin and the stress test. For those to work, you need a lot of accurate data. How do you address the challenge of missing data or low quality data?
I know I've been 30 years in that business. I cannot give you one example of one client with good data. So forget the dream of having perfect data. So you have to start somewhere. Because if you say, I don't have the data, so I'm not starting anything, well, yeah, guess what? If you're not starting anything, you're going to be in the exact same situation in 10 years from now. So you have to engage. And this is why I like the food and beverage example that we shared. They had no clue about tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 suppliers. And in the case of food and beverage, this is super important because with a new regulation in Europe, you have to be able to demonstrate that your cocoa farmer in Ivory Coast is not using child labor. So this company will have to go to tier 3, tier 4 suppliers, data accuracy. They do not have that today, but at least they started their roadmap. And the first level of data, the first level of insight drove a lot of benefits. So there's no magic. You have to go through the data cleaning side. It's a multi-year journey, but there's no alternative but starting it.
How does resilience impact the organization of your clients?
Well, back to my point, this is, again, the big impact on the organization is killing the internal silos. And there is an underlining agenda with this resiliency initiative. You have to really drive your supply chain end-to-end performance globally in an integrated fashion, which means that you have to go beyond the silos. And this is why, from the organization standpoint, resiliency should be managed at the top level, CEOs, COOs, with fully integrated KPIs like revenue and profitability at risk, so that you kill the internal silos. And this is why we see at Best Performance, they set up those dedicated resiliency team, because you need to bring this end-to-end perspective. Otherwise, you cannot excel at resiliency management.
And can you give any examples of companies that are doing really well?
Well, you've got the example of Ford, which started years ago. Same with General Motors. I can see Schneider Electric, this Aptiv, food and beverage companies. I think all companies, I have no example of companies not saying, we need to do something. And we need to change the way we operate. Otherwise, if we keep business as usual, we will not be able to take the right decision. And I've got many examples of clients that were facing some crisis. They had the information, but they were not able to take the right decision because they do not have the right process, the right decision routines. So you do not address your resiliency challenge without changing your organization and the process.
And just finally, you mentioned a few times in your talk that resiliency is a new topic. Where do you see it, or where would you like even to see it going over the next, say, 10 years?
Well, I think that the next dimension of resiliency will be sustainability. Because I said, when you look at your supply chain performance, you look at cost, you need to reduce your cost, and you want to optimize your service level. So supply chain optimization has been about, optimizing cost and service. Now we're having, can your supply chain resist to disruption? This is resilience. But the next step is about, can my supply chain be fully sustainable? Because this is the next requirement. You cannot allow to have a supply chain which has higher carbon impact versus competition. So cost, service, resiliency, sustainability is the name of the game. And good luck, guys. This is an interesting journey, but you have no alternative but going for it.
Well, Pierre-François, on that note, we will leave it there. But thank you so much for joining us. It's been, as I said, really, really informative.
Thank you, Sam.
You very much.
Thank you to you guys. Bye-bye.